They laughed when Elena Bennett was called just a housewife. It happened at the Bennett family's annual business dinner, surrounded by executives, expensive suits, and the people who had spent years treating her like she had contributed nothing. Her husband, Ethan, smiled. His father, Richard, laughed. Then one of the executives leaned back and said, "She doesn't work, she just stays home." Elena didn't argue. She simply lowered her eyes and remained silent. Then the company's attorney walked into the room. Victor Hale wasn't carrying a gift. He was carrying a thick legal file. His eyes moved across the table until they found Elena. "Mrs. Bennett, I need to speak with you immediately." The laughter stopped, because nobody understood why the company's most important attorney had come looking for the woman they had just called useless. And inside that file was a document that could prove the Bennett family had been making millions from something they never actually owned. The Bennett family had spent years making Elena feel like an outsider in the company she had helped build. Ethan handled investors. Richard handled the board. Executives handled the public presentations. And Elena? She was expected to smile, attend dinners, and stay out of business conversations. That was exactly what they wanted everyone to believe. But Elena knew the company's technology better than anyone in that room. She had been studying its core system long before Bennett Industrial became a billion-dollar business. That evening, while the executives argued about a sudden production problem, Elena quietly studied the numbers on the screen. A manufacturing delay had appeared in 3 separate facilities. The executives blamed the suppliers. Richard blamed the operations team. Ethan blamed the engineers. Elena noticed something none of them had seen. The failures weren't random. They were following the same pattern. She finally spoke. "The temperature threshold is wrong." The room went quiet. An engineer looked at her. "What?" Elena pointed toward the production data. "Your new calibration is causing the system to shut itself down." Richard frowned. "Since when do you understand engineering?" A few people smiled. Elena didn't react. She simply looked back at the screen. "Since before this company started making money from it." Ethan laughed nervously. "She's probably mistaken." But Victor Hale, standing near the doorway, didn't laugh. He stared at Elena. Because he had just heard something that didn't make sense. If Elena really understood the technology that well, why had nobody ever seen her name attached to it? And the answer was buried inside a patent file that the Bennett family had never bothered to read. The room remained silent after Elena identified the problem. One of the senior engineers checked the production data again. Then his expression changed. "She's right." Richard immediately turned toward him. "Are you sure?" The engineer nodded. "The calibration was changed 3 days ago. That explains all 3 shutdowns." Ethan stared at Elena. For the first time that evening, he didn't look amused. He looked concerned. Elena quietly returned to her seat. She didn't ask for credit. She didn't say, "I told you so." That somehow made the room even more uncomfortable. Richard cleared his throat. "Fine. You noticed a problem. That doesn't mean you understand the entire system." Elena looked at him. "I understand the part that matters." Richard frowned. "What part is that?" "The part you keep calling your most valuable invention." Nobody spoke. Ethan's expression hardened. "How would you know anything about the invention?" Elena paused. Then she gave the simplest answer. "Because I worked on it." The room went completely still. Victor Hale slowly lowered the legal file in his hand. He had spent 6 years reviewing Bennett Industrial's corporate records. He knew the names of the executives, the engineers, the shareholders, the inventors. But Elena Bennett's name wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the original technology. Victor looked at her. "Mrs. Bennett, exactly what did you work on?" Elena didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward Richard. And for the first time, Richard looked afraid. Because Victor had just realized there was one question the Bennett family had avoided for years. Who actually created the technology that made them rich? Victor didn't sit down. He opened the legal file instead. Mrs. Bennett, when exactly did you work on the technology? Elena looked at Richard. 12 years ago. Richard immediately interrupted. That was a long time ago. Victor turned toward him. I didn't ask you, Mr. Bennett. The room became uncomfortable again. Elena continued. The original system worked, but it was too expensive to manufacture. She pointed toward the production data. I developed a modification that reduced the manufacturing cost and made the system stable enough for mass production. One of the engineers stared at her. That modification is the reason the product became commercially viable. Elena nodded. Yes. Ethan finally spoke. You helped with some early testing. That's all. Elena looked at him. Is that what you told everyone? Ethan didn't answer. Victor slowly turned another page in the file. Then why does the company's original development history list Ethan as the primary creator? Elena's expression didn't change. Because Ethan presented the work. Richard quickly stepped in. And he built the company around it. Elena nodded. I know. There was no anger in her voice. That made the words hit harder. She wasn't denying what Ethan had done. She was simply making it clear that his contribution wasn't hers. Victor looked down at the documents again. Something wasn't right. If Elena had created the modification that made the invention commercially viable, there should have been a legal record. A filing. A transfer. Something. He turned another page, then stopped. His eyes widened. Elena noticed. What did you find? Victor slowly looked at her. Your name. Ethan's face went pale. Richard stood up. Victor, close that file. Victor didn't move, because he had just found the first piece of evidence that Elena wasn't merely connected to the invention, she might have been legally connected to it. And the next document could reveal something the Bennett family had spent 12 years trying not to remember. Richard reached for the folder. That's enough. Victor pulled it away. Actually, Mr. Bennett, it's not. Richard's face tightened. This company has operated for 12 years without any dispute over ownership. Victor looked at Elena. That's exactly what concerns me. Ethan stood. Victor, whatever you found, Elena was never involved in the company's ownership. Elena remained seated. She watched them argue. Then Richard made a decision. If there's a question about the patent, we'll have outside counsel review it. Victor nodded. Good. Richard looked relieved. He didn't realize what he had just done. Because the moment outside counsel was contacted, every historical filing connected to the invention had to be reviewed, including the original application, including the inventors, including every transfer, including every signature. The family had spent years assuming Elena had no legal connection to the technology. Now they were about to ask a lawyer to prove it. Ethan turned toward Elena. You don't need to get involved in this. She finally looked at him. I wasn't planning to. That answer unsettled him. Because Elena wasn't fighting. She wasn't threatening them. She wasn't even asking for money. She was simply waiting. Hours later, Victor received the first response from outside counsel. He opened the attached records. Then he read the original patent application. His expression changed. The primary inventor wasn't Ethan Bennett. It wasn't Richard Bennett. And it wasn't Bennett Industrial Group. It was Elena Bennett. Victor stared at the document. Then he checked the ownership section. His hands stopped moving. The patent had never been transferred to the company. The family had spent 12 years building an empire around an invention they believed belonged to them. Now they were about to discover who actually owned the key that kept it running. Victor read the patent records twice, then a third time. He finally looked up. Richard. This patent was never assigned to Bennett Industrial. Richard's face lost its color. Ethan shook his head. That can't be right. Victor turned the document toward them. The original inventor is Elena Bennett. Silence. Ethan stared at his wife. You never told me? Elena looked at him calmly. You never asked. That answer hit harder than an accusation. Richard stepped forward. But the company has spent 12 years developing, manufacturing, and selling this technology. Victor nodded. And the company may continue doing that. Richard exhaled. Then Victor added, but only under the rights granted by the patent owner. Everyone looked at Elena. For the first time that evening, nobody called her a housewife. Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed her. Because they finally understood what the document meant. The invention that had built the Bennett family's fortune wasn't simply connected to Elena. She legally controlled the intellectual property that made the entire product possible. Victor placed another document on the table. Independent licensing estimates put the remaining commercial value of this patent above $380 million. Ethan stared at the number. Richard slowly sat down. 380 million. The family had spent years treating Elena like a financial dependent, yet the single asset they needed most was worth more than anything they had ever given her. Ethan stepped closer. Elena, why didn't you tell anyone? She looked at him. Because 12 years ago, I believed my family would eventually give me the credit. A long silence followed. Then she added, I was wrong. But the patent wasn't Elena's most dangerous advantage. She had one more document, and this one could determine exactly who was allowed to use it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Richard changed his tone. Elena, we can fix this. She looked at him. Fix what? The misunderstanding. Ethan immediately stepped in. We can give you a percentage of the company, a senior position. Whatever you think is fair. Elena almost smiled. Whatever I think is fair? Ethan nodded. You created something valuable. You deserve to benefit from it. Elena looked at the patent documents on the table. 12 years ago, I deserved to be acknowledged for it. The room became quiet again. Richard frowned. You were young. I was 20. And you were married to my son, Richard said. We thought the company was the right place for the invention. Elena's expression remained calm. You thought my husband should receive the credit. Ethan looked away. Nobody corrected her. That silence told her enough. Victor closed the patent file. There is another issue. Richard looked at him. What issue? The company has represented itself as the exclusive owner of the technology for years. Richard's expression hardened. That was never intentional. Victor didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Intentional or not, the records don't support that claim. Ethan looked at Elena. Please, don't destroy everything we've built. Elena finally stood. I don't want to destroy it. Ethan's face relaxed. Then Elena continued. I want to know why you were willing to destroy me. That question silenced the entire room. She looked at Richard. Why did you never ask who created the invention? Then she looked at Ethan. Why did you never ask why I stopped signing the documents? Ethan's expression changed. He remembered. Years earlier, Elena had quietly stopped signing certain company papers. He had assumed she was being difficult. Now he understood. She had been trying to protect herself. Victor gathered the documents. The company has one option. Richard looked toward him. What is it? Negotiate a legitimate license with Elena. Elena nodded once. But not tonight. Richard stared at her. Then when? She picked up her bag. When everyone has stopped pretending this was an accident. Because Elena wasn't leaving the table to negotiate a price. She was leaving to decide exactly what the people who erased her from their own invention would have to give back. The next morning, Bennett Industrial's boardroom was full. Richard sat at the head of the table. Ethan sat beside him. Victor Hale placed a final folder in the center. Then the doors opened. Elena walked in. This time, nobody laughed. She took the empty chair across from her husband. Victor opened the folder. Elena Bennett is the registered owner of the patent. Richard looked at her. What exactly do you want? Elena was silent for a moment. Then she answered. 3 things. Everyone waited. First, the company will acknowledge my invention publicly. Ethan swallowed. Second, every dollar owed to me from previous licensing use will be independently calculated and paid. Richard's expression tightened. And the third? Elena looked directly at him. You will never again decide someone's value because of the role they have inside this family. Nobody spoke. Then Richard asked, And if we refuse? Elena calmly looked toward Victor. Then the license ends. The room went completely silent. No threats, no shouting, no dramatic speech. Just one decision. The company could continue, but only if it finally recognized the woman who had built the technology keeping it alive. Ethan looked at Elena. I was wrong. She nodded. I know. He looked down. Can you forgive me? Elena took a breath. Forgiveness is personal. She stood. Accountability is business. And with that, she walked out. For 12 years, they had called her just a housewife. Now the company would introduce her by the title they should have used from the beginning: inventor, owner, and the woman whose name they could no longer erase. Elena didn't destroy the company that had betrayed her. She did something far more powerful. She made the people who erased her live with the truth, and made sure they could never erase it again. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about becoming impossible to dismiss. They called her just a housewife, but the one thing they needed most had her name on it. And when the truth finally arrived, Elena didn't need to raise her voice. She simply let the document speak. This is Revenge Diary, where silence turns into revenge. If you believe silence can be more powerful than revenge, subscribe to Revenge Diary. And tell us in the comments, would you have forgiven Elena's family or made them pay for what they did? Because sometimes, the strongest response is simply letting the truth speak for itself.